This program was made possible by a grant from S.R. Foxley and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you wish to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below. Greetings and Merry Christmas to you and all your loved ones. Now, I've never been great about getting good Christmas videos out, so this year I thought I'd finally throw my hat into the ring and do a War on Christmas video. Now wait, hear me out. Yes, I'm sure you already know there's no war on Christmas. You know the idea is absurd, you've seen 1,000 other videos about it, and you've been making fun of the idea yourself for years. So for me to argue against it or even ridicule it at this point is just kind of beating a dead reindeer. Now I know what you must be thinking right now. Beating a dead reindeer sounds a lot meaner than beating a dead horse, but you're not totally sure why. But let's stick a pin in that. For now, let's just get to the point, which is that instead of beating, whatever corpse you find least disturbing to picture me defacing, I'm going to look into why Christians and conservatives are so obsessed with the idea of a war on Christmas to begin with. And to do this, I'm going to analyze how this puffed-up dean of a university that's really just a YouTube channel tries to convince his audience that we atheists stole Merry Christmas, in a video that's gotten 4.5 million views, 25,000 likes, and was made in November of 2016. Way to keep it fresh, Prophet of Zod.
You're a mean one, atheist Grinch. You really are a heel. Without Jesus in your heart can't even really feel, atheist Grinch. And why wouldn't you take Merry Christmas away when we're all just molecules floating through the universe and you have no basis for morality anyway?
Now let's be clear about something before we start. This video is less about debunking Prager's paint-by-numbers dumb as f*** arguments than it is about breaking down how he uses them to pander to an audience that already believes him. See, on paper, it looks like Prager is trying to convince people that the phrase Merry Christmas, and basically any other explicit use of the word Christmas, is under attack. But I don't think that's what this is really about, because upon examination, it becomes clear that Prager basically tailor-made this video for his audience, articulating thoughts, fears, and prejudices that they already had in mind but weren't necessarily good at putting into words. Or just jumping onto Fox News' bandwagon. I don't know. He knows that his viewers already, 1. Yearn for an imaginary good old days based on some idealized version of their childhoods, when everything was good and pure, and society was a neat, homogeneous place where everybody more or less agreed with them. 2. Think that some nebulous group of secular left-wing activists, who are simultaneously represented as an elitist minority, but also basically everybody outside the conservatives' besieged but enlightened little circle, are willfully attacking all the traditions and values that made those good old days good. And the fact that a sizable portion of America suddenly disagrees with them is just a symptom of these liberals unleashing rampant political correctness in the name of tolerance. And finally, 3, are just generally horny for persecution, which I guess is pretty much the driving force behind the rest of this bullshit. And truth be told, this video is probably just a manifestation of that underlying phenomenon. We are really not going to understand this video or why it works unless we remember that his audience comes to it with this mentality. So keep this in mind as we analyze the steps Prager takes to convince his audience a bunch of boogeymen are conducting a war on Christmas.
The change from wishing fellow Americans Merry Christmas to wishing them happy holidays is a very significant development.
So of course first he suggests that something big is happening. That we're basically seeing a drastic monolithic shift from the use of the words Merry Christmas to the use of the words Happy Holidays. Of course language doesn't work this way and history doesn't bear out this contrast. I won't go into too much detail, but the history of Christmas and its relationship with Christianity is long and complicated. At times it was emphasized less than New Year's. At times it was looked down upon by many Christians as an excuse for revelry and rowdy behavior, and until relatively recently it didn't even take on a form most of us would recognize. What's more, people have been using a mix of Happy Holidays and Merry Christmas for a long time, including for purposes of inclusiveness or summing up the many holidays that are crowded around this time of year. So this idea that we always had the Christmas of your youth, and that everybody always only said Merry Christmas until secularists came along and ruined it, is just totally baseless. But I guess if your mind is used to comparing the good old days with corrupt modern times, the suggestion appeals to you enough that you're not going to go fact-checking or anything.
Proponents of happy holidays argue it's no big deal. Proponents of Merry Christmas are making a mountain out of a molehill. But the happy holidays advocates want it both ways. They dismiss opponents as hysterical, but at the same time, in addition to replacing Merry Christmas with Happy Holidays, they have relentlessly pushed to replace Christmas vacation with winter vacation and Christmas party with holiday party.
And now second, he adds a vital component, which is the villains of this story. Remember, our fall from the good old days can't have just happened. Just as the Garden of Eden story needed its serpent to trick Eve into taking fruit in the name of knowledge, this tale needs its radical left-wing activist to trick society into eroding its values in the name of tolerance. You know what? I kind of like that. It just popped into my head, but I think this parallel really gets at something in the psyche of conservative Christians. But the point is, they can't just think there was an organic populist drift away from their values. Or, I guess, even their way of greeting people. It all had to be orchestrated at the hands of malevolent tricksters. And let's just look at how these tricksters are represented so far. They're duplicitous,
But the happy holidays advocates want it both ways.
as well as relentless and persistent. And if you compromise with them on one point, they'll immediately look to take more ground.
In addition to replacing Merry Christmas with Happy Holidays, they have relentlessly pushed to replace Christmas vacation with winter vacation and Christmas party with holiday party.
Meaning the only course of action is to dig in your heels and resist at every turn, lest they drag you and society down an endless slippery slope. And of course they're patronizing pricks who think Merry Christmas activists are hysterical.
They dismiss opponents as hysterical,
And by suggesting this, Prager slips in a third step, which is prepping his audience to deflect common sense observations about their behavior. But this still leaves one glaring question unanswered. Who are these people conducting the war on Christmas? When did they start waging it, and in what capacity? So far, Prager has given us no specifics, never cited any action that anybody ever took to end the use of the words Merry Christmas. His villains, identified only using the bizarre label of Happy Holidays advocates, are as faceless as his cartoon characters to this point. And it will be telling to see if he ever identifies them or otherwise points to anything specific they've ever done.
So then, which is it? Is all this elimination of the word Christmas important or not? The answer is obvious. It's very important. That's why so much effort is devoted to substituting other words for Christmas. And these efforts have been extraordinarily successful.
Oh, good. So he's finally going to describe the steps people have taken to eliminate Merry Christmas?
In place of the universal Merry Christmas of my youth, in recent decades I have been wished Happy Holidays by every waiter and waitress in every restaurant I have dined, by everyone who welcomes me at any business, by my flight attendants and pilots, and by just about everyone else.
Okay. Well, apparently, after getting us all prepped for actual information, he just offers his own anecdotal impressions that everybody seems to be wishing him Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. So I guess we're still waiting for him to name the bad guys and explain how they made this happen.
When I respond, "Thank you, Merry Christmas," I often sense that I've actually created some tension. Many of those I wish Merry Christmas are probably relieved to hear someone who feels free to utter the C word.
What? You called them a c***?
But all the sensitivity training they've had to undergo creates cognitive dissonance.
So just to be clear, we've just seen the full extent of Dennis proving his point. Yet he's still done nothing to demonstrate an actual concerted effort to eliminate the phrase Merry Christmas. Instead, all he's done is pepper us with vague impressions about how people nowadays react to hearing it. Of course, he starts by implying that everybody's aghast at the idea that he could utter such words. But then here he has to tread carefully, because his followers kind of want to feel the world's against them, but they need that balance with the general impression that the silent majority is on their side and that everything's being corrupted by a small leftist elite. Prager does a pretty impressive job of walking this tightrope, making sure to speculate that a lot of people are mostly happy to hear him say it, but are torn because of the dreaded sensitivity training. This was a pretty slick move, because while these words offer no real information to back up his claim, every conservative knows what to think and how to feel upon hearing them, and uttering them obscures whether members of the public are victims or complicitors in the war on Christmas. This was pretty well done in a douchebaggy kind of way. Of course, and I'm beating this horse or reindeer or whatever to death, he never says anything specific about how any organization ever started using this sensitivity training to beat the Merry Christmas out of people. Now, I'm not saying this never happened to any extent anywhere, but the fact that Prager so vaguely implies a large-scale, culture-wide effort without giving us any names, dates, or organizations gives us plenty reason to be suspicious. But hey, we still have time, right? There's one final thing I want to point out here, which is that the reaction he says he's getting is pretty vague. Nobody in these stories ever says or does anything. He just senses an intangible tension, which is convenient because it would leave a lot of room for imagination if, for example, there actually were no war on Christmas, but he wanted people to feel like there was.
The opponents of Merry Christmas and other uses of the word Christmas know exactly what they're doing. They're disingenuous when they dismiss defenders of Merry Christmas as fabricating some, quote, war on Christmas. Of course it's a war on Christmas.
It's totally not fabricated, but for some reason you can't give us any specifics about who's fighting it or how.
Or more precisely, a war on the religious nature of America.
And there we go.
The left in America, like the left in Europe, wants to create a thoroughly secular society. Not a secular government, which is a desirable goal and which in any event has always been the case in America, but a secular society.
Here he seems to be drumming up fear of attempts to turn us into a secular society, as if that means we'd become an atheistic or anti-religious society. But that's just not the case, or at least very few people are trying to do such a weird thing. By secular society, most of us just mean a pluralistic society in which people can hold on to their private beliefs while still being generally polite and cooperative with others in public. For example, I don't blurt out that God doesn't exist to everybody I see wearing a Christian t-shirt, and I'm not going to be unhelpful to a religious person in the workplace. I'm atheist in that I don't believe there's a God, and I'm outspoken about that fact in the proper time and place, but I'm secular in that I understand that if I want to live alongside people who disagree with me, I need to put my opinions on the back burner and show a polite level of restraint in public. That's a good goal for everybody, religious and non-religious alike, and while we shouldn't legislate such behavior, we can definitely apply reasonable social pressure to encourage it. But Dennis's goal, on the other hand, is becoming pretty clear. He's conflating the expectation that people not be assholes with an aggressive attempt to drive religious language out of society altogether, to the extent that people can't even say something as benign as Merry Christmas.
Most people do not realize that the left believes in secularism as fervently as religious Jews and Christians believe in the Bible.
Well, what would this video be if he didn't imply atheism as just another religion with its own fanatics?
That's why Merry Christmas bothers secular activists. It's a blatant reminder of just how religious America is and always has been.
This is all silly because Merry Christmas just doesn't bother most of us, and it carries very little religious connotation anymore. It's now a vague greeting that most of us utter pretty reflexively, giving no more thought to the fact that we're saying the word Christ than to the fact that we're using an anachronism like Merry, or as far as that goes, that the alternative word holiday means holy day. So let's think about what Prager is claiming here. Basically, secularists are conducting a grand plot to remove one word that's lost most of its religious connotation and replace it with another word that's lost most of its religious connotation. Now yes, I'm sure that between the two words, people today more strongly associate Christmas with a specific holiday and its namesake religion. But I find it truly bizarre that anybody would think we'd want to throw ourselves headlong into a committed battle over such a benign figure of speech. And indeed, very few of us are bothered by the word. For example, I opened this video by saying Merry Christmas, which was a natural thing to do because that's the greeting I most often use around this holiday season. And in a poll I conducted on Twitter, almost half of respondents in my mostly atheist following said they use the phrase too. And I suspect it's actually slightly higher, as I doubt 1 in 10 people really greet others sarcastically around this season. What's more, over 90% said that regardless of whether they use it themselves, they don't object to the greeting, and many who did take issue with it said they only did so within a public school setting with the phrase being used by a teacher. Now these are non-scientific polls, of course, but I think such a response from within the atheist community seriously calls into question his assertion that there's some monolithic secular push to eliminate the phrase from public use. Now by this point, Prager's already laid out his flimsy case for a war on Christmas, and from here his video just degenerates into a weird rant about how secularists will eventually try to eliminate Christmas altogether, and about how not saying Merry Christmas is mean, even going so far as to show one of his faceless enemies beating the shit out of Santa while he's lying on the floor, which was a strange artistic choice. Look, this video is obvious nonsense, but it gives a pretty enlightening glance into the mind of the religious right, including how it manufactures and stokes unfounded fear of other groups. In this case, Dennis Prager does it by inventing a narrative of the sudden loss of the words Merry Christmas and then blaming it on a nameless, faceless group of secular liberals whose actions he never identifies. He deals purely in rumor and insinuation, basing his entire case on vague personal anecdotes and right-wing talk radio buzzwords that he knows will get a rise out of his audience even if he literally never proves anything or even references a single point of fact. Seriously, go back and watch his video and see if he ever claims anything that isn't totally vague and intangible. He gets away with this because he taps into things his viewers want to feel, and that's all they need him to do. Invent a problem, invent an enemy, imply America used to be great, and suggest a way to make it great again. Sound familiar? Anyway, Merry Christmas once more. Even though I'm an atheist, I like that phrase. I love this holiday, and I just wish people like this hat would stop using my favorite time of year to drum up totally unnecessary hate against people like us, who would celebrate it right alongside Christians if only they wanted to have us. And now some holiday greetings from atheists.
Merry Christmas.
But we are going to make a little clip of saying Merry Christmas to Prophet Azad.
Ho, 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 ho. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Hold on, everyone, say Merry Christmas, goddammit.
Merry Christmas, goddammit.
Merry Christmas, goddammit.
All right, that's it. I'm shutting the show off.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I just want to take this moment to say Merry Christmas to everybody, even if you're a creationist.
3, like 2, 1.
Merry Christmas.
Go.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Prophet Azad, Merry Christmas.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your kin. Good tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Merry Christmas!